Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Glitch Reality. Thank you very much for tuning in to episode 4. I hope you enjoy it. Let's proceed with the episode. Reality is fragile. Layers of code, history, and perception stitched together. But what happens when those seams split? When the forgotten signals resurface and the familiar becomes something else entirely? Welcome to Glitch Reality, where every story is a distortion, a crack in the system, a glimpse into what was never meant to be seen. Because sometimes the glitch is truth. Love is fragile, built on trust, routine, the quiet rituals of everyday life. But what happens when those rituals change? What if your partner becomes different? What if the hands that you used to hold start feeding you something? Something you don't understand. Mark's wife began making an effort again. Their fights were over. The meals were perfect. But some tastes are harder to swallow than others. Tonight on Glitch Reality, I serve you a taste of love. Love. Love has a taste. Did you know that? It's not just a feeling. It lingers on your tongue, settles in your stomach, seeps within your bones. Some say love is sweet, like honey on a lover's lips. Others say it's bitter, like the aftertaste of heartbreak. But I've learned the truth. Love has a different taste altogether. One you don't forget. One that changes you, bite by bite. And once you've had it, nothing will ever satisfy you. You don't believe me, do you? That's alright. You will. Marriage. Marriage is supposed to be built on love, trust, partnership. But what happens when all of that crumbles? And all that's left is expectation and silence. Mark barely looked up from his plate as he chewed. He focused on the soft glow of his phone screen. His thumb scrolled lazily, barely there a smirk on his lips. Whatever was on that screen was far more interesting than the meal that was in front of him. Elena sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, watching. The silence between them stretched. Not comfortable, not warm, just empty. Hadn't always been like this. They used to talk. They used to laugh. She used to feel more than just a presence in the house. A shadow moving between chores, between expectations. But now Mark barely saw her. Oh, he acknowledged her. When he wanted something, a clean shirt, a hot meal, a warm bed. But seeing her, that had stopped long ago. She shifted slightly, the old wooden chair creaking beneath her, but he didn't look up. How's the food? She asked, her voice carefully even. Mark hummed in response, barely tasting the bite that he had swallowed. It's fine. Fine. That's all she ever got from him now. Not thank you, not this is delicious, just a grunt, a nod, and the cold weight of indifference. She gripped her fork tighter, the metal pressing into her palm. Across the table, Mark chuckled at something on his phone. Eyes glued to the screen, he wasn't even pretending to be present. What's so funny? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. Mark finally looked up, his smirk still lingering. Nothing. Just a video. Elena waited, hoping he'd elaborate, hoping he'd share the moment with her. But instead he shook his head, turned back to his screen, kept scrolling. She swallowed the bitter lump rising in her throat. There was a long time she thought about this. Would have demanded his attention, his effort, but fights were useless. Because Mark never thought there was a problem. Elena had once told herself this was just a rough patch. Things will get better. But people don't change. They don't change unless they want to. And Mark didn't see a problem. So one day, she just stopped trying. And yet, as she sat there watching him, an idea started to take root. A new way to fix things. A way to make him see her again. She smiled then. A small, secret thing. You work so hard, Mark. You deserve a little more effort from me. That got his attention. His eye flickered up, scanning her face, and was trying to decide if she was being sarcastic. What do you mean? Elena reached for his plate and stood, gathering the dishes. You'll see. Tomorrow, she would make him something special. Something rich. Something he'd never forget. And this time, Mark will notice. Something changed after that night. A shift so small, most delicate. Mark didn't notice at first. But Elena, she felt it. She savoured it. For the first time in months, Elena woke up with a purpose. She stood in the kitchen, bathed in the dim golden light of the early morning, carefully preparing breakfast. The scent of butter and searing meats curled through the air, thick and inviting. Not the usual frozen meals Mark barely acknowledged. No, not at all. This was something different. Something special. She had spent all night making sure it was perfect, and she plated it, arranging each bite with precision. Her hands trembled, not with nerves, but with anticipation. Mark wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes from his sleep. The scent hit the second he stopped. Damn, that smells amazing. He never complimented her cooking, not once in all of these years. Sit, eat. Mark didn't argue. He dropped to the chair, mouth practically watering, and dug in without any hesitation. The moment the first bite hit his tongue, he cried, Jesus, Elena, what is this? Elena sat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap, watching him chew, watching him savour it. Just something new, she said softly. Do you like it? Mark nodded, barely listening. He was too busy eating, swallowing, bite after bite after bite. It was rich, deeply seasoned, unlike nothing he had ever tasted. It melted in his mouth. Warm, tender. Perfect. You should cook like this more often, Mark said between bites. What is this? Elena tilted her head. Love, she murmured. Mark loved. But she didn't. She just watched. And with every bite he took, something in her settled. This was right. This was fair. Mark had spent way too long looking past her, treating her like she was invisible, like she was nothing. But now every piece he was swallowing was a piece of devotion to her. Bite by bite by bite. He had no idea, did he? No idea what he was really eating. No idea what she had done. But that was the beauty of it. Love is always the best when it's unnoticed. So after that wonderful breakfast, Mark headed off to work, just like usual, his normal routine. It all started with something small, something so ordinary, so easy to ignore at first. Mark stood in line at his local Bean and Brew, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to his barista calling out the orders. This was part of his routine. Every morning, same place, same time, and of course, same flirtation. Her name was Hannah, a cute little thing with dimples and a habit of leaning just too close when she handed him the coffee. It wasn't serious at all, just harmless fun. Elena hated it, obviously. She hated a lot of things these days. But that wasn't the problem. Mark reached the front of the line and glanced up, expecting to see Hannah's usual smirk through her playful eyes. Instead, there was someone else. A different barista. One he'd never seen before. He frowned. "Where's Hannah?" The new girl barely looked up. "Who?" Mark blinked. "Hannah, the girl that usually works mornings." The barista shrugged, reaching for a cup. "I don't know who that is, sir. What's your order?" Something about the way she said it itched him. Hannah had worked there for months. He saw her every damn day. This was no girl that didn't know her. Maybe she got fired. Maybe she quit. But wouldn't she mention it? Should there be some trace of her somewhere? Still, Mark shook it off. None of his business. He placed his order, stepped aside, pulled out his phone to check his Instagram. He went to Hannah's Instagram. Nothing. No new posts. No updates. Hannah had always been active. Selfies, gym pics, mirror shots, but now her account was gone. Mark frowned, tapping her name again and again and again, but the app just gave him the same error. User not found. This was weird. This was very weird. A slow, nagging discomfort crept into his chest. Something was off. But Mark just kept going for the day. After he'd finished his work, Mark started driving home. Driving home, Mark tried to shake this feeling of unease. People quit their jobs, delete their accounts. It happens from time to time. But somehow, it just didn't sit right. When he got home, Elena was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. The smell hit him immediately. Rich, deep, mouth-watering. Just like the meal from the night before, just like breakfast. She looked completely different lately as well. Not in a bad way. If anything, she was glowing, more put together, happier. It should have made him feel relieved. Instead, it made his stomach twist. Elena glanced over her shoulder, smiling. "You're home early." Mark nodded, slowly towing his shoes off. "Yeah, coffee shop was weird today. Didn't go back after work." Elena turned back to the stove, staring. "Oh. That girl I always talk to. Hannah. She wasn't there." Elena didn't react. She just kept staring. "Maybe she moved on." Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah, maybe." A pause. Then the scent of sizzling meat curled around the air, warm and thick. Mark cleared his throat. "Hey, you didn't like her, did you?" Elena finally looked up, her soft smile. "Why would you ask that?" Something in her eyes sent a shiver through him. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just imagining things. Or maybe something was missing. And he was just about to realize just how much. Paranoia. We all know about paranoia. Paranoia doesn't hit all at once. It's not a sudden realization, a single moment where the world shifts. No. Paranoia is slow. It starts with a whisper in the back of your mind. A feeling you can't quite place. Something's not right. But you tell yourself, it's nothing. It's nothing. Until it is. The days passed and kept going, and the feeling just didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. At first it was just Hannah, but then Mark started noticing other little things. A co-worker, Derek. who used to grab drinks with after work. He stopped showing up. Not just at the office. His number was disconnected too. His desk was cleared out overnight. Moved, someone had said. Got a job in another state. But Mark swore the last they had talked last week. He didn't say anything. Then there was Mr. Lowry, their neighbours from across the street. Mr. Lowry was a kind man. Always waved at Mark from the porch. But one day, his house went dark. The mail piled up. The porch light never came back on. When he asked Elena about it, she just shrugged. He was probably old, probably moved in with the family. This explanation made sense. All her explanations did. But yet, they didn't too. Something about the way Elena said it so casually, so unbothered, it made his skin prickle. Mark pushed his fork around his plate, his appetite missing. The food was still incredible. Elena had been cooking something spectacular every single night now, but something about it, something about the food, it made him uneasy. Maybe it was the way she just watched him eat. Not obliviously, not in a way that he could call her out on it, but it felt like she was waiting. Like she was testing something. You're not hungry? She asked, tilting her head. Mark forced a small smile. Just a long day. Tired. Elena nodded, setting down her fork. Maybe you should rest, she said softly. You've been acting awfully strange lately. The words made his stomach twist. He'd been acting strange. Mark let out a small laugh, rubbing the back of his head. Yeah, I guess. But deep inside, the fork curled through his chest, gnawing at him. Was he imagining things? Or was something truly wrong? Denial as well. Denial is easy. Denial is comforting. But even the best lies start to crack. And Mark was about to see the first fracture. It was just another night. Or at least, that's what Mark told himself. Another quiet dinner, another sip of wine, another lie. Mark tried to ignore it, the growing unease curling inside his stomach, tried telling himself it was nothing. Everything was normal. That Hannah didn't matter, Derek didn't matter, Mr. Lowry didn't matter. People leave, people disappear. But then he saw it. Something so small, so easy to miss. It was late. Elena was already asleep. Mark had woken up thirsty, his mouth dry, his body heavy with exhaustion. He shuffled into the kitchen, barely thinking, and opened the fridge. And that is where he noticed it. A plastic container, shoved behind the milk, almost hidden. Almost. Mark would not have given it a second thought, except something felt wrong about it. It wasn't labelled, like all the other leftovers were, and there was no date. Just a dull, greasy smear of red against the lid. Mark swallowed. Probably just sauce. Probably. But before he could stop himself, his fingers reached out, gripping the cool plastic. He pulled it forward and popped the lid. And inside, Mark froze. His stomach turned. It was meat. That much was obvious. Thick, raw chunks of it, resting in a shallow pool of dark, red liquid. But it wasn't like any cut of meat Mark had ever seen. It wasn't the right shape. It wasn't the right texture. Something about it was just off. And then his eyes caught something else. Tucked between the glistening folds of muscle, almost buried in the mess. A fingernail. Still attached to a scrap of pale, peeling skin. Mark breathed. His stomach lurched. His mind screamed at him to drop it, to look away. But his body wouldn't move, because he knew. Deep down, he already knew. This wasn't pork. This wasn't beef. This was something else. Something that shouldn't be in here. Something that shouldn't be in a fridge. In his stomach. His throat tightened, bile rising as it flashed up. The past few days have now clicked into place. The disappearances, the missing people, the way Elena smiled when he ate. A shaky breath rattled through his lungs, his vision blurred, and behind him, a voice, soft, sweet, and loving. "Mark? What are you doing?" The truth was now right in front of him. Bloody, undeniable, and as he turned to face her, he realized he was already way too deep. Too far gone. And worst of all, he was still so hungry. He should have screamed. He should have run. Should have grabbed that container, shoved it in her face, demanding to know what the hell was in the fridge. But instead he swallowed. And he lied. Mark turned slowly, the container still clutched in between his hands tightly. Elena stood in the doorway, bathed in the dim glow of the kitchen light. Her nightgown hung loose around her frame, swaying ever so slightly. She was smiling, but something about it was different. Not a forced smile, not a fake smile. Just a smile that was too wide. Like she already knew. Like she was waiting. Mark forced a breath, his grip tightening even more around the plastic. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. His throat. It caught in his throat. His voice came out all wrong. Too dry. Too strained. Elena tilted her head to the side the way she does. "Oh." Mark forced a shrug and looked away, pretending that he didn't see the flesh, the fingernail, this new truth. "Just hungry." Elena's eyes flickered towards the open container in his hand. Her smile deepened. "Well, we can't have that, can we?" She moved towards him. Mark didn't move. Mark couldn't move. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Every fibre of his being is now screaming, "Run! Get out! Go! Now!" But he didn't. He didn't what he always did. He let it happen. A moment later, he took a seat at the kitchen table. Elena stood over him, slicing something onto a plate. The knife moved too slowly. The meat was too red. The smell was too thick. She slid the plate in front of him, setting a fork down by his side. "Eat," she said softly. "You're always so busy, Mark. You barely notice how much I do for you." A quiet laugh comes from Elena. "I just want to take care of you." Mark, now staring at his plate. His stomach is twisted. The meat was cooked, glazed in rich golden sauces like she always made. It looked perfect, like all the meals before her. But now he knew. It sat in front of him like a dare, a test, and he could not fail. So he picked up the fork, and he ate. The taste hit his tongue. It was delicious, savoury, perfectly seasoned. Mark's throat clenched. His hands trembled. He felt sick, but he forced himself to swallow. Elena was watching him, and when he'd reached for another bite, her smile widened again. It should have disgusted him, should have made him wrench, but he couldn't. He just kept eating, bite after bite after bite, and somewhere deep inside he wondered, when was it his turn? Would he at least taste as good? All of a sudden, Mark woke up. He woke up to the smell of antiseptic in the air, bright lights, white walls, and the taste of iron still clinging to his tongue. Mark's head pounded, his mouth was dry, his limbs were heavy. He tried to move, but something tugged at him. Restraints. thick leather straps around his wrists and his ankles. Panic flared in his chest. What had happened? The memories were blurry, fractured pieces swimming behind his eyes. The knife, the scream, the warm blood on his hands, and then nothing. A shadow fell over him, soft fingers brushed his hair, then a voice. Her voice. Oh, Mark, you made such a mess. Elena sat beside him, dressed in a pale blue sundress, looking as radiant as ever. No blood, no bruises, no sign of a fight. Mark's throat tightened. You? His voice was weak. His stomach twisted, a sharp, deep pain spreading under his ribs. Elena tilted her head. You scared me, she said, pouting. You weren't supposed to see. You weren't supposed to know. Her fingers trailed down his arm. His arm, soft, loving, gentle. But don't worry, love. She leaned in, lips just beside his ear, and whispered, I saved some for you. Mark jerked against the restraints, his stomach clenched and violently lurching. His body rejected it. Everything he had eaten, everything she had fed him, it was still inside of him, rotting, festering, or worse, moving. His breath hitched, something shifted. Deep inside his stomach, a slow, thick, unnatural movement, crawling, pushing, something with teeth. Mark screamed. He tried to escape, but it was too late. The meal was already inside of him, and now it was still hungry. Wow, what an amazing thing love is. Love can make you feel the best in the world, or it can make you do the most insane things. This story was inspired by a friend of mine, so very thank you much to her for giving me the idea to write this story. Well, between Mark and Elena, that was an interesting one. But thank you very much for tuning into Glitch Reality. Please remember to submit your stories to the email address down below, because the 15th episode of season 1 is going to be a user contributed stories. I have 2 in so far. I'm working on many, many more, hopefully. There's going to be some interesting episodes coming up as well. On the 30th, I've got a Mother's Day special for the UK people, because it is Mother's Day over here in the UK. So please stay tuned for that. So you have 2 episodes in 1 week. But if you did find yourself interested in the darkness, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the glitch with others. Every follow helps us keep the stories flowing, and trust me, they're only going to get stranger. Until next time, please keep your eyes on the glitch, because sometimes the glitch is truth. I've been Kieran. Thank you very much for tuning in.